Hi, my name is Pui Ting. I'm currently doing my bachelor thesis on self-sovereign identity, and I would like to ask you some questions on the topic.
Fantastic. And where are you going to school?
Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences,
Okay, fantastic. All
and I'm
right, yeah,
studying
great.
international business and management.
Well, good luck. This is an exciting time, and you could not have picked a better topic for the modern age of the connected world we live in today. So what questions do you have for me?
To start off, could you please introduce yourself and tell me about the work you do and
Yeah,
how is that
absolutely.
connected to?
Yeah. So absolutely. So, my name is Michael Becker. I run a advisory and consulting practice called Identity Praxis. Identity Praxis is about that, putting practical theory of identity concepts into theoretical concepts of identity into practical application. That's what the term means. What I do for companies is I help on product development, I help on market development, and I help on business development at the intersection of identity and personal information management. That's what I do for a career or professionally. On a personal note, I am also a writer. I've written a number of books in the field of strategic marketing, particularly mobile marketing, as well as a whole suite of articles and blogs in identity and personal information management. I am also a professor. I teach strategic marketing and mobile marketing at National University. I also have a YouTube channel where I teach people on the 4 C's of knowledge creation and management, particularly through the lens of a tool called Tinderbox. And then finally, I'm a student. I'm actually also working on my doctorate, looking at the what it will take to help people adopt an emerging new technology called the personal information management solution, which is a suite of technologies that and capabilities that give people agency and self-sovereignty over their data. So, I love the topic that you're raising here because I personally I look at it professionally as a writer, as a teacher, as well as a student myself. So I'm I've been living this idea for quite some time.
And that's a lot that you have going on there. How did you get started in personal identity and self-sovereign identity?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I started my doctorate way back in around 2004, five-ish. And in October of 2005, I was reading a paper on markets and privacy from John Dighton, who is currently the head of Harvard's Business School. And there was a line in that paper that I call it my Newtonian moment, where John had written that personal information is an economic asset that should be owned by the user. And that just dropped on my head. And I'm like, oh my God, that's true. And that is the future. But I have absolutely no idea what that means. And so I've spent the last 15 years really trying to understand what that means and understand, what is privacy, what is trust, what is data, what is, over this period of time, the concept of self-sovereign identity didn't even exist in 2005. It has recently emerged as an emerging concept. So for me, this whole journey started, back and around that time. And I started first looking at it through the lens of marketing and advertising. For example, what would it mean if we had control of our data and our data could actually be programmatically infusing the types of marketing and media and exposure that we receive? And there might be a way for us to be able to monetize our ability to receive advertising, for example. That was some of the initial simple thoughts that I had on that concept way back when. But now fast forward, 15 years, it's significantly evolved in so many glorious ways.
Yeah, internet has only become a bigger part of our lives each day, and we cannot do without technology. And there's always that sensitive part of privacy to it as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Okay.
how would you, like, after all of the research that you've done, and how would you describe your attitudes towards privacy and data? How that has been going,
Wow,
right?
what a great question. So for me, I think one of the important things to think about is when we consider the concept of privacy, first and foremost, we have to understand that it's contextual, and that Privacy means something very different and culturally around the world. Privacy means something very different to each and every individual. I mean, we all have our own sphere of what we determine to be private, and some people are more open, some people are less open. And so there's certainly some interesting crossovers there. I also think this idea of conceptually the term privacy, what does it mean to be physically private versus what does it mean to be digitally private, are starting to conflate and overlap each other. And so there's a new term in the industry, I'm not sure if you've heard, but the phygital being, where we're actually not just physical and we're not just digital, we're actually phygital. And that's something that we in society are now having to contend with quite a bit. When it comes to privacy, we need to think about the fact, and in privacy management, or in this context, self-sovereign identity, we need to realize that and to really truly understand that question that you just asked. There's actually essentially 5 pillars you need to look at to be able to properly and effectively ask that question. You need to look at it technologically, like how do we implement and support privacy? We need to look at it economically. What are the economics and industry driving forces that influence that privacy? And we need to look at it both from a government regulatory policy perspective, but also just from the law perspective, what is legal and what's not. And then we need to look at it from a moral and cultural perspective, much like I was just referring to. And then finally, the 5th pillar is the political perspective, which is the intersection and the interplay of those other 4 pillars. Now, when we look at this conversation about privacy, I like to kind of roll it up and suggest that there's really, there's more than just the concept of privacy, because one of my favorite definitions of privacy, and I've derived some slight variations of it, was created by a guy named Alan Weston in 1967, and he defines privacy as the ability to manage the flows of the information about you, the who, what, when, where, for how long, and for what purpose someone can have access to you. Someone can have access to your information, say in the digital context. So privacy, at the end of the day, for me, is about the flows and the managing of the flows of my information. There are 2 other really critical points to this conversation. The other critical point is security, and that security is about the authorization and access to my information. So who is authorized to have my information, and who gets to access that information. So that's the protective part of it. And then the 3rd pillar there is the compliance part, the rules, the regulations, the purpose. For what purpose are you allowed to have my information? For how long are you allowed to retain my information? To what extent do I have rights over that information? And what's interesting is culturally, there's and around the world, there's basically 3 sets of rules. There's the what I call the open data, or a set of rules. That's the Western model, the United States model, which is the organization that collects the data owns the data. There is the European model, which is the what's called the self-sovereign model, or the sovereignty model, which is data is a human right, and that people, regardless of situation, creed, context, whatever, has a human right to some control over their data. And then the 3rd model, which is more of the Chinese model, which was what we'll call it, is the social engineering model, where we're using data to engineer behaviors within society that we want, to have society function in the way we want. And more often than not, what people will do is they'll based on often where they're born, their technical lens, their regulatory lens, their economic lens, their cultural lens, their political lens, they'll align to one or more of those 3 pillars: open data, sovereignty data, or social engineering model, and they'll think, okay, that's the right one. But what we need to realize is there isn't one right one model. What we need to realize is that in every country and in every situation, all 3 of those models are playing out simultaneously all the time. So even in the United States, while our primary model is the open data model, with the recent innovation and introduction of the California Consumer Privacy Protection Act and other regulatory laws that are happening throughout the United States, we are also having the self-sovereignty model emerge. And then we also have social engineering models like the credit score, where we are scoring people and then determining whether or not they're allowed to get a loan or not based on this credit score, which has actually been derived by commercial entities, and in some ways that engineers the society in a way to function. So we have all three of those kind of ideological parameters coming on the space. So when you ask this kind of on the surface, what appears to be a very simple question, what is privacy? It's actually a very complex one that is intermixed with a whole bunch of different considerations and attributes that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, so about the three sort of systems, how we're handling data, how do you feel about those? What do you feel is that we should work towards more, or what is?
Yeah, for me, there's not a matter of which one is it's not a matter of which one is more important. It's a matter of it's all is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are just the fundamental factors that are creating the influence of how our data flows within society. So, privacy, the concept, of privacy, the ability to administer and manage the flows of the information, is a core insight. Security, the ability to ensure that only those that are authorized and have for my information, and what information are they allowed to access, and for what period of time, and is my information actually secure and encrypted, and to guarantee that only those that are authorized have access to it is a fundamental core principle. And then that idea of rules and regulations, compliance and laws, policies and laws, those are immutable as well. So it's really not a matter of which one of the key elements are critical. It's a matter of those are the three primary levers that one needs to manage to be able to successfully implement and deploy a privacy, an effective privacy regulation and solution.
Yeah, we do see that the self-sovereign system is coming up a little bit more, and there's more importance.
Yeah, let me explain that. Yeah, so I see in your questions here, you had a question about, according to your experience, what is needed for SSI. Mm-hmm. For the most part, SSI is actually a technical concept more than it is anything else. I mean, it's in terms of its implementation. Sorry, my green screen backdrop keeps moving. It's a technical concept more than anything else. So SSI specifically is referring to, or at least when I hear the term SSI, I immediately gravitate to it's really more related to the implementation, right? And so for the most part, when you're referring to SSI, you're referring to the technical implementation of self-sovereign identity, which means that a system is based on the WC3 standards of decentralized identity keys and verified credentials, and a fundamental ledger blockchain, right? And that you have an immutable public ledger to be able to administer and manage your technology. That's or the flows of information. Now, SSI doesn't necessarily need to be that way, but I think because it's been born, the concept, that term has been born out of the technical discussions. It tends to technically get rooted in to SSI is about blockchain. SSI is about decentralized identity keys. SSI is about verified credentials. When in fact, I think at the end of the day, SSI, self-sovereign identity is, do I, as an individual, have the right and ability to have agency and authority and control over my information? In other words, for me, SSI is more about, that point of the three pillars that I just revised. Do I have the ability to control the flows of my information? Can I be guaranteed that my information is secure? And will my information be used based on appropriate policies and both governmental regulatory policies as well as civil legal policy constructs?
I'm sorry, based on your answers, I'm trying to
yeah
adapt the questions. a little bit as it doesn't follow up properly.
Yeah, no, it
Uh,
does. But like, let's jump to number 4. Like, what do you think the main reason for somebody to use an SSI solution? So, the main reason to use an SSI solution is to have, at the end of the day, peace of mind, right? That when I engage in a relationship with an organization, I can trust that my data is going to be, that my digital being, that my digital self, that my will be safe and secure. That we have a set of known and established policies that we agree on for how my information is going to be used and for what, and for which purposes. That I am only disclosing the minimally viable information needed for that current transaction. So when, a lot of what SSI is about, and one of its core elements under, leveraging this idea of a decentralized identity key or a verified credential, is that when you, as say a third party entity or second party entity, a business, ask me for my information, I only need to disclose the minimally viable information you need to make whatever commercial decision or relationship we're having together. The simple, it's so much more complex than this, but the simple example is if I go to a bar and you ask me for my birth date, right? All you need to know is I'm over 21. You don't actually need my picture and my address and my phone number, etc., which is all the information I disclose when I show you my driver's license. So SSI allows you to really manage to what level of information that, the minimally viable set of information that necessarily needs to be disclosed. Moreover, it allows me to revoke that information or your continued access to that information at any time. So there's going to be a tremendous number of really interesting use cases that will evolve when it comes to our ability to manage that flows of information, to ensure that information is secure, and to ensure that that information is being supported on through the appropriate governmental and or social policies.
and do you see any reasons why someone would possibly not want to use the SSI solutions?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if we look at technology adoption theory, I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. My attitudes may not be aligned to them. My, social norms, my friends may not be using it. My boss may not require it. I personally sit at the innovation, life cycle. Like, am I an early adopter of technology, or am I a late adopter, aka laggard? My cultural orientation, effectively where I'm born, my economic status, am I in the luxury status or the poverty status? I mean, so people's economic status will actually absolutely play a factor in that. Education status, to what extent are they, am I have access to these tools and these technologies? But fundamentally, I think one of the biggest factors is a term in industry we refer to as the privacy paradox. And the privacy paradox is essentially comes down to this point. We will forego our privacy and security for short-term value and convenience. So if it's too hard, I'm just going to say, forget it. Here's my address. Give me my coupon, right? So if an SSI solution or a capability is too difficult to use, then people won't use it. If it's perceived as being too expensive, they won't use it. If it's perceived that they don't have the ability to do it, they don't understand it, they won't use it. User experience is critical when it comes to this. Another core factor is trust. Right? Do I trust the company? Do I trust the entity to which I'm interacting with, or the environment to which the solution exists? And the answer is, if I don't trust it, no, I won't use the solution. So there's just a tremendous number of factors that come into play.
But in that sense, is the same idea as in when we started adopting the internet and having to change that mindset of you don't trust the technology.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So again, in that regard, it's going to take, in many ways, years for us to adopt it. And so, typically, technologies go through there's a terminology in industry that I love called the Gartner technology hype cycle. And Gartner refers to like technologies climb this cycle where they start getting hyped, and they hit this peak where everyone's so frothily excited about it. Like, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. And then the excitement doesn't meet the reality. And so then the technology falls into what's called the trough of disillusionment, and it sits there and wallows in the trough of disillusionment for a period of time, until such a point in time that it either itself comes out and goes to a plateau of productivity, or merges with and combines with other technologies for it to become productively used. And technologies, as they go through that cycle could take anywhere from a couple of years to 10 years or more, or never, right? They could fall into the trough of disillusionment and never make it out, or they can never fully reach the hype cycle process. And so there'll be variations of this for as we evolve and start implementing SSI type capability. And again, this is why I refer back to this need and this important point that we've got to be really careful not just to look at SSI as an implementation of a piece of technology. It also has to have effective business cases, and companies need to be able to make money from it. People need to be able to make money from it. There's the cultural aspects, the trust aspects need to be there. The technology itself, does it actually work? Is it secure? Does it perform properly? All of those pieces need to be there, and then the politics of it all need to align. So there's a lot of little pieces and nuances that will need to come together for all of this to really effectively work.
Yeah, of course, and it's quite new still. It's only been around for less than a decade. The whole self-sovereign identity
concept. Yeah, it's been around about 5-7 years.
Yeah, less than a decade. So it's it's still something that they're working on, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see that? Going back to that hype, do you feel like this would possibly meet up to the hype, or will be, as you said, with the other systems, will be implemented with?
Well, this is just a position within life. Nothing ever meets up the hype. Mm-hmm. At some point, something always gets overhyped, and then we always need to reset. that's just a cyclical cycle of everything. So what will happen is, and it really will depend on context and where and what the area, because the hype won't be generalistic for all of society. I see SSI is going to play a really important role in like username and password logging credential management. It will play a really important role in secure communication. So I can see SSI taking root in customer service. It will play a role in an early role in going back to that password and username credential management. An early role in identity resolution, like am I who I say I am, right? Can you trust that? So there'll be some core factors where it's going to play itself out there too. So what we'll see is, and then you've just got the fundamental underlying capabilities of the technology itself will go through cycles. So you'll have hype cycles of the fundamentals of the technology, but you'll also have hype cycles of the technology as it's applied to particular business sectors and business use cases, and those issues will go through their own cycles as well. And then invariably, what I think what we're going to learn though is the cycles are going to be much faster than we've experienced in years past, right? Whereas before, technologies like this would cycle in like 5 to 10 year periods of time. This is going to cycle in 3 to 5 year periods of time.
Yeah.
Do you agree or not agree? Oh, is that the cat?
Yeah, that was my cat.
Awesome. Don't worry about it. I love to see her. She jumps up.
He's walking around.
Awesome.
Yeah, excuse me. So in your estimation, how far along is the technology to being applied in society in at least those sectors that you mentioned?
Well, the answer to that question is it's being applied right now. It's here. It's already being implemented. It's already being used. I think the more appropriate question is, when will it happen at mass market scale? Right? So
Yeah.
there's a wonderful quote from William Gibson. The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So, self-sovereign identity exists. Self-sovereign identity works. The issue right now is it's not happening at scale. We don't fully understand the economic models of it. The cultural, moral, social aspects aren't fully well understood. We've not educated people well enough about it yet, let alone executives on how to actually build business models around it. So like anything else, McKinsey at one point had a consulting firm had put together a model they called the three horizon model. And so I think fully self-sovereign identity is still in what we call Horizon 3, which is it's still evolving. So Horizon 1 is about taking capabilities that an organization has and applying it to immediate revenue generating commercial opportunities to serve existing clients or customers. Horizon 2 is about taking existing capability and or slightly new capability and applying it to finding new customers or serving existing customers in new ways. And Horizon 3 is about taking new concepts and new technologies and using those and evolving technologies and using those to find and serve new customers or develop new capabilities and new ways of doing things. So SSI is still all about that Horizon 3 new way of doing things, new concepts, new customers, and it's going to start slowly bringing itself into modern commercial business and business opportunities. I think we're going to start seeing our first mass market capabilities of SSI probably within the next 18 to 36 months. And it will become a nationally well understood, established conversation in about, say 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years.
But that doesn't mean by the way, just to be clear, that doesn't mean that it's productive necessarily. It still could be wallowing in the trough of disillusionment, right? It's just going to be, we're all going to understand what it is. I don't think today most of us really understand what it is.
Yeah. But I feel like awareness is a very big part of that and getting that conversation going.
Yep.
So in that sense, what do you think that the conditions are that companies would need to be to start offering SSI products?
Yeah, at the end of the day, people don't care. I mean, so when you say to offer SSI products, I don't think that we're going to turn around and say, hey, I'm selling you an SSI product. I think what companies will do is they'll turn around and they'll integrate SSI into their infrastructure and into the product experience that they're bringing to market. And they very well may not even tell the user that it's SSI. They'll just say, hey, my experience is secure. You can trust me. They'll bring the benefits of SSI to the market by demonstrating to the user through their actions that they can be trusted and things are secure. They'll use SSI, for example, as a means of, now you can do this. Now you can have a secure bi-directional connection with my support team. And when you connect to my website, you don't only see that little lock on the top of the screen that says this website is secure with a cryptographic key, but you'll see another signal that says, I guarantee you it's me. Right? Because that's what SSI does, is one of its core tenets is the ability to have that bi-directional verification of the credentials, that I am who I am and I know you who you are. Now let's exchange information. So I think the first implementations are going to be around that. Again, the average consumer could care less about what the technology is. What the consumer wants is peace of mind, trust, and security. So they can go their merry way and not worry about how it's being done. So I think that's how it's going to get implemented. The challenge right now, though, is the conversations primarily being driven by technologists, and the technologists don't really understand the business or the marketing lingo. And I'm one of those, by the way. So I'm still struggling myself on thinking more empathetically from the consumer's perspective and using their language, not mine, to be able to discuss it. And I think that's where a lot of the challenges come into play. So that's where the piece of marketing really comes in. So again, we need the whole team to make this work. We need the technologists, the marketers, the economists, the finance team, the senior business executives. We need the whole diverse conversation in play. Moreover, I don't mean just diverse too from a functional perspective organizationally. We also need diversity of people, right? We need, just using the backdrop of what we're currently seeing in the United States from the necessity of diversity in language. As I mentioned before, we need, rich people. We need poor people. We need white people. We need black people. We need Asians. We need, Southerners. We need everyone to be weighing in on this conversation because of the way we started out the conversation. Privacy is so individual and privacy is so culturally, contextually oriented. To truly build a solution, you need to understand the voice of your broad constituency to make it work. Which, by the way, in the end, since you can't serve everyone all at once at all the time, your audience segmentation perspective from a product perspective is really important, right? So, from a company, if they're going to implement an SSI solution, they need to think about who are we really serving, what problems are we really solving for, and let me go talk to that particular group and solve it for them now. And then as you get purchased and as that works, then you bring other audiences and other constituencies in, hear their voice, hear their needs, and move it on. So, for example, when it comes to, I don't know if you know this, but yesterday was International Privacy Day.
Yeah.
January 28th is International Privacy Day. And I was listening to some of the talks, and one of the talks that I really heard was this idea of luxury surveillance versus imposed surveillance. So, for example, for the more wealthy and the affluent, surveillance is a luxury and it provides security. And I know my house is being monitored and the cameras out there are great, and isn't this wonderful? But when it comes to imposed surveillance on, say, the less affluent people in society, it's not a luxury. It's actually a risk. It's a harm, because what happens if they are, their behaviors are now being monitored that could be used against them by their landlord, or that information can be used by law enforcement or some other means to essentially social engineer and or adversely affect their lives. And so that's the distinction. So technology is not neutral in that regard. Technology needs to be, and SSI will play the same role in that. It will need to essentially have itself play itself out in the context that it's being used.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the timing of self-sovereign identity?
For me, I think the timing's perfect. And I don't know if you're involved in yoga, but when you do yoga, yoga instructors will say, look, if you're doing yoga, it's perfect, right? Whether or not you can touch your toes or not doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter where you're at any given moment. What matters is that you're thinking about these concepts. You're thinking about these issues that, this idea of data has value. Data is imbued on an individual, that individuals should have some semblance of agencies or rights over their data. And SSI is, from a technical view, is a means of implementing that. And so I think we're at a great position in society right now. And I think SSI is in a perfect place. But it's going to, as I mentioned, it's going to evolve fast. The WC3 has established that, SSI, the decentralized identity key as the next layer, next standard layer of the internet. So, it's happening. Verified credentials are happening. They're coming. They're being implemented today. And so I think we're in a really good spot. The question then is, really comes down to how do we find those commercial use cases that allow companies to be able to, economically and efficiently and effectively deploy SSI solutions in a way that consumers and users benefit and trust. And likewise, how do we find ways that consumers can then actively start adopting and using them. And I think that's the biggest, the next big hurdle that we need to think through.
I think as well currently with the COVID situation going on, that SSI is also being slowly implemented in the medical field.
Not slowly, not slowly
Or
at all.
yeah,
There's about 10 different or so 10 or less implementations of SSI for, say, contact tracing and the health certificates. Right. So, for example, that could be one of the first primary use cases in SSI is because think about it. I go get a COVID test and it comes back negative. That negative is a verified credential. The issuer of who gave me the test has issued to me a certificate that says I am at this point in time negative. And now I have that credential that I then could turn around and show to a merchant, say the airline, that says, here's my SSI certificate, my verified credential that says I am in fact negative in this given period of time. And you can trust that I'm negative because you can look at the cryptographic key from the issuer that verifies that in fact that this is a legit certificate, right? So those are some of the kind of what I'll call happy path implementations of the implementation of this type of technology. The question though is, what happens when that same data can be used for more nefarious reasons, such as for discrimination or bias? And what happens if that information is used for, what's called secondary purposes and by unintended or unauthorized users. And that's where the problems really come into play, right? In both from socially, economically, commercially, politically, et cetera. It can be quite devastating for an individual if that information is misused. The other thing about that too is once data like this gets out there into the wild, and for example, from a marketing perspective, is scraped by third-party data brokers, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get that information back, right? And so how do we manage that, and how do we make sure that information now? Because imagine that information gets out there in the market. And is now being used by artificial intelligence and machine learning engines to teach the algorithm how to interact with me. But how do we ensure that data that the algorithm is using to learn isn't old, isn't wrong, in such a way that could ultimately adversely influence how basically the digital society interfaces and recognizes me as I move through my digital life. Those are the fundamental issues that we really need to kind of solve.
Yeah. Sorry. The question that I had written down was, what are, according to you, the most important stakeholders in the creation of the ecosystem? But as you mentioned already earlier, everyone has
it's everyone
plays a role in that.
It's everyone. I mean, again, I think we are at a watershed moment of human history, where we really truly have become the digital beings that are digital economic value than our physical self.
Sorry, you cut out for.
I'm sorry. So, I mean, what's interesting today is I believe we're at a watershed moment in human history, where because we are digital beings today, our digital self has more economic value than our physical self. And that if we don't actually have an established, managed digital presence, we don't actually functionally exist in society today. And so that's one of the core issues that we need to contend with. And I think what's also interesting is we need to realize that you actually have a digital footprint about 8 months before you're born. The first time you go to the doctor and they create that sonogram you put that fact that you've been in a database, and then as that embryo grows in mom and then ultimately is born and becomes baby, you've got a digital footprint now that will be with you for the rest of your life. And how do we manage that? And what does that mean? And by the way, too, your digital footprint will exist long after you're dead. So again, I think it truly.
How is that data being managed?
And then how is that data being managed? And how can that affect and adversely affect your descendants? So again, I think this is probably one of the most important eras in human history.
I feel like that's also like on a long term but for now, what do you think would be the more the early end users of as well as SSI is being more implemented in different industries as well? What do you
Yeah.
think would be more the early end users?
Again, I think it depends on how and where. I think COVID testing will definitely happen there. It's already being implemented up in, say, British Columbia for, the ability for me as a citizen to gain access to the data that a government has on me. I think it will initially be used as a secure way of implementing, regulatory rights, like under the auspices of GDPR and CCPA. I think it's going to have a really effective role in, identity verification and credentialing, such as in the environment of password management. I think it's going to have a really important role in, secure communications, that we can in fact verifiably trust that who I'm talking to is who they say they are, digitally. So I think that will fundamentally shift and change things as well. And then eventually I'll be able to micropayment and monetize my data. And then I also think that it will play a huge role as we integrate this security and these capabilities into my personal information management solution. Beyond any commercial sense of this, think about the concept of self-sovereign identity. It's self-sovereign. It's I own it, I control it, I have agency. So therefore, even if I choose not to share it with anyone, that data in the end of the day will have value to me. I'll be able to learn more about myself. So I think this idea of quantified self will play a major role. And as I learn to, understand like what media do I consume, what food am I eating, what level of activity am I having, and then we're going to see a lot more automated tools that will align those capabilities to help bring more joy and happiness. Because we'll be able to understand the ins and outs of our life in a more secure and private way, such that we'll be able to then more effectively adjust our behaviors to bring joy to our lives. So I think there's a huge piece of SSI that's often overlooked, is just the fact that if I have a secure data set that I can manage about myself, how much can I actually learn about myself? And will I be willing to or interested in doing so? And I think that's a big and often overlooked part of the conversation.
Do you feel that there are any other ideas or philosophies about identifications which could be pursued?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, we've been talking about this for quite some time now, but the big thing here is, and I think one of the biggest challenges is the distinction between identity, or what you were just starting to refer to as identifiers, meaning what are those keys that allow me to identify a unique thing or individual, and versus, say, personal data, which is my name, my address, my demographics, my intimate information, my heart rate now, my longitudinal health over health. And there's two camps. You have the identity people who see personal data as just a subset of identity, that you take all this personal data and that resolves up to identity, right? Whether or not it be a person or a thing. And then you have the other group that says, no, it's all about personal data, and identity is just one attribute of my personal data, because I can have many, 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 many different identifiers that are all part and parcel of my personal data set. The reality is they're the same thing. They're one side of both coins. It's just how do we, which lens are you looking at, looking through it? So I think that's a really important kind of concept too, to understand our kind of natural lens bias. Are we coming from the identity identifier perspective or the personal data aggregate perspective? And being able to look at this and have this conversation through both lenses.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I hope you got value out of this.
Definitely. I wrote so much down and I tried to keep up, and I'm very happy it's recorded and I will be able to look at it.
Okay, so I'll drop this on a drive and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much for your time. Bye.